For decades, American travelers have enjoyed relatively easy access to destinations around the world. But as global politics shift, immigration policies tighten, and new regulations emerge, some countries are closing their doors to U.S. passport holders. Whether due to diplomatic tensions, new visa restrictions, or security concerns, certain nations are making it harder than ever for Americans to visit. Today, on Explore with Me, we're counting down the 10 countries that are restricting or outright banning American travelers in 2025. If you're planning a trip abroad, you might want to double-check your destination because some of these places won't let you in. And before we get started, don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on more engaging content. Number 10. Russia. Russia has long had a complex relationship with the United States, but in 2025, entry for American travelers is becoming even more difficult due to ongoing geopolitical tensions and sanctions. The Russian government has tightened its visa policies, making it harder for U.S. citizens to obtain travel permits. According to the Russian Foreign Ministry, new security measures will result in longer processing times and increased scrutiny of American applications. The restrictions come amid strained diplomatic relations, particularly following sanctions imposed by the U.S. government. In response, Russia has introduced additional hurdles, including mandatory in-person interviews and stricter documentation requirements. This means that even if you do get approved for a visa, the process could take months. Travelers already in Russia face increased monitoring and surveillance, with reports of heightened security at hotels, public spaces, and transportation hubs. According to Reuters, some American tourists have been subjected to intense questioning at entry points, further discouraging visits. Unless relations between the two nations improve, Russia is expected to maintain these travel restrictions for the foreseeable future. For now, Americans hoping to visit Moscow's Red Square or St. Petersburg's historic sites may need to reconsider their plans. Number 9. China. China has been steadily tightening its restrictions on American travelers, citing national security concerns and deteriorating U.S.-China relations. In 2025, stricter visa policies and heightened travel restrictions are making it increasingly difficult for U.S. passport holders to enter the country. According to the U.S. State Department, China has ramped up its surveillance and visa screening processes for American visitors. One of the biggest challenges for travelers is the increased scrutiny of past travel history and digital activity. Reports suggest that authorities are reviewing visitors' social media accounts, communication records, and affiliations before approving visas. This has resulted in longer processing times and frequent visa denials for American tourists, journalists, and business travelers. The Chinese government has also expanded its use of exit bans, which prevent individuals from leaving the country due to ongoing investigations or diplomatic disputes. Some U.S. citizens traveling for business or family visits have reported being detained for questioning, further raising concerns about personal safety. With tensions between the U.S. and China remaining high, it is unclear when or if these restrictions will ease. For now, Americans hoping to explore Beijing's Forbidden City or Shanghai's skyline may need to reconsider their travel plans. Number 8. North Korea. North Korea has long been one of the most restricted and secretive countries in the world, and in 2025, the doors remain firmly shut for American travelers. Following ongoing sanctions, diplomatic standoffs, and security threats, the North Korean government has completely banned U.S. citizens from entering. According to the U.S. State Department, any American attempting to visit North Korea risks arrest, detention, and severe legal consequences. In previous years, specialized tour operators were able to secure travel permits for foreigners under strict conditions. However, due to increased political tensions and espionage concerns, North Korea has halted all American tourism and business visits. This means that even diplomatic and humanitarian travel is now heavily restricted. The situation worsened after reports of foreign detainees being used as political bargaining chips, leading to the U.S. government reinforcing its "Do Not Travel" advisory. With no official U.S. embassy in North Korea, any American detained in the country has no diplomatic support or legal recourse. Unless drastic changes occur in U.S.-North Korea relations, these restrictions are likely to remain indefinitely. For now, North Korea is one of the most forbidden destinations for American travelers, with virtually no way to legally enter the country. Number 7. Iran. Iran has had a tense relationship with the United States for decades, and in 2025, restrictions on American travelers have only intensified. Due to ongoing diplomatic disputes, sanctions, and security concerns, Iran has further limited entry for U.S. citizens. According to the Iranian Foreign Ministry, new policies require additional background checks and longer visa processing times for American visitors. One of the biggest risks for Americans traveling to Iran is the possibility of arbitrary detention. Multiple reports from human rights organizations indicate that dual citizens and foreign nationals have been detained under vague charges of espionage or threats to national security. The U.S. government has repeatedly warned travelers about the high risk of arrest and lack of diplomatic assistance in Iran. In addition to security concerns, Iran's visa process has become more complex and restrictive. U.S. citizens must now apply through a third country and undergo lengthy screenings before receiving approval. These new regulations have discouraged many potential visitors from attempting to enter the country. Given the ongoing geopolitical tensions and risks, Iran remains one of the most difficult countries for Americans to visit. Unless diplomatic relations improve significantly, restrictions will likely remain in place for the foreseeable future. Number 6. Venezuela. Venezuela, once a popular destination for American travelers, has become increasingly difficult to visit due to political turmoil, economic collapse, and security risks. In 2025, the Venezuelan government has imposed stricter visa requirements and travel bans on U.S. citizens, citing diplomatic tensions and alleged foreign interference. According to the Venezuelan Foreign Ministry, these restrictions are aimed at reducing foreign meddling in the country's affairs. Crime remains one of the biggest concerns for travelers. According to the U.S. Department of State, Venezuela has one of the highest crime rates in the world, with frequent occurrences of kidnappings, robberies, and violent attacks targeting foreigners. Many U.S. citizens have been advised to avoid travel altogether due to the high risk of extortion and arbitrary detainment. Economic instability has also made travel to Venezuela extremely challenging. The country faces hyperinflation, food shortages, and unreliable infrastructure, making it difficult for foreigners to access basic necessities. The lack of diplomatic relations between Venezuela and the U.S. further complicates matters, leaving American travelers with little to no consular assistance. With no signs of political or economic stability in the near future, Venezuela will likely remain one of the most dangerous and restricted destinations for U.S. travelers in 2025. Number 5. Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has imposed stricter travel policies for Americans in 2025, making entry more complicated than ever. While the kingdom has been promoting tourism in recent years, tensions between the U.S. and Saudi governments have led to increased visa restrictions and heightened security screenings. According to the Saudi Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the changes are part of an effort to tighten national security and regulate foreign influence. Americans applying for visas now face longer approval times, additional background checks, and higher fees. The kingdom has also placed limitations on travel to certain regions, including areas near Yemen and certain religious sites that were previously open to visitors. Reports indicate that U.S. citizens are subject to stricter monitoring and movement restrictions, making travel more difficult. Saudi Arabia remains an important destination for business and religious travel, but these new restrictions make it a far less accessible option for many Americans. Those who do visit must adhere to strict cultural and legal guidelines, with severe consequences for violating local laws. Given the current diplomatic climate, these restrictions are expected to remain in place indefinitely. Number 4. Cuba. Cuba has once again tightened travel regulations for American visitors, marking another setback for U.S.-Cuba relations. In 2025, the Cuban government has introduced new entry requirements that make it more difficult for Americans to obtain tourist visas. According to the Cuban Ministry of Foreign Affairs, these restrictions are a direct response to renewed U.S. sanctions and diplomatic tensions. Under the new rules, American travelers must apply for visas through third-party countries, making the process longer and more expensive. Additionally, the Cuban government has placed limits on the types of activities American visitors can engage in, restricting independent tourism and requiring official government-approved tour operators. This is intended to regulate the movement and activities of U.S. travelers while in the country. Economic conditions in Cuba have also worsened, with ongoing fuel shortages, unreliable infrastructure, and a struggling economy, making travel less appealing. The U.S. government has also warned citizens about limited consular support and increased surveillance by Cuban authorities. Unless relations improve, Cuba will continue to be a challenging and restricted destination for American tourists in 2025. Number 3. Belarus. Belarus has increasingly restricted American travelers due to its close political alliance with Russia and ongoing tensions with Western nations. In 2025, Belarus has imposed new visa bans and travel restrictions targeting U.S. citizens, citing national security risks. According to the Belarusian Foreign Ministry, American visitors must now undergo additional screening and justification for their travel purposes before entry. Americans who previously traveled to Ukraine, Poland, or other European Union nations may face even stricter scrutiny, as Belarusian authorities claim to be monitoring foreign influence within their borders. The U.S. Department of State has also issued a Level 4, "Do Not Travel" warning due to concerns about arbitrary detentions, surveillance, and restricted movement within the country. The Belarusian government has been accused of cracking down on foreign journalists, activists, and business professionals, making it an increasingly hostile destination for Westerners. With diplomatic ties between Belarus and the U.S. at an all-time low, travel restrictions are likely to remain in place. For now, Belarus remains a heavily restricted destination for American travelers. Number 2. Afghanistan. Since the Taliban regained control in 2021, Afghanistan has remained one of the most dangerous and inaccessible destinations for American travelers. In 2025, the Taliban government has completely closed entry to U.S. citizens, citing diplomatic tensions and national security concerns. According to the United Nations, no formal visa process exists for American travelers, effectively banning all U.S. passport holders. The Taliban has also imposed severe restrictions on foreign aid workers, journalists, and former military personnel, with reports of arbitrary detentions and human rights violations against foreigners. The U.S. State Department has labeled Afghanistan as a "do not travel" country due to the high risk of kidnapping, terrorist activity, and law enforcement abuses. Americans who previously worked with Afghan government agencies or NGOs have been specifically targeted, increasing security concerns. The lack of formal diplomatic relations between the Taliban and U.S. authorities further complicates any possibility of travel. Given the current conditions, Afghanistan will likely remain off-limits for American travelers indefinitely. Number 1. Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan has long been one of the most isolated and secretive countries in the world, and in 2025, it remains nearly impossible for American travelers to enter. The Turkmen government has severely restricted all foreign tourism, citing public health concerns, national security, and strict governmental control over foreign influence. According to the Turkmen Foreign Ministry, visa applications for U.S. citizens are frequently denied or left pending indefinitely, making entry nearly impossible. Even before these restrictions, Turkmenistan was already known for its complex visa process and extreme government regulations. The country has very few foreign embassies and requires all travelers to be part of officially guided tours, with their movements strictly monitored. Reports from travelers indicate that access to internet, communication with locals, and freedom of movement are heavily restricted, further discouraging visits. According to Human Rights Watch, Turkmenistan's government operates one of the most repressive regimes in the world, making it an extremely difficult place for foreigners, especially Americans, to visit. Unless there is a drastic shift in policy, Turkmenistan will likely remain one of the most closed-off nations on Earth. For now, American travelers hoping to see the famous Gates of Hell or the grand architecture of Ashgabat will have to look elsewhere. From war-torn regions to politically isolated states, these 10 countries have made it increasingly difficult or outright impossible for Americans to visit in 2025. Whether due to diplomatic disputes, security concerns, or restrictive government policies, these travel restrictions reflect the changing global landscape and shifting international relationships. As tensions rise, more nations may continue to impose stricter visa policies and entry bans, reshaping the way Americans experience global travel. If you're planning an international trip, it's more important than ever to stay informed, check visa requirements, and understand the risks before booking your flight. Which of these restrictions surprised you the most? Have you ever faced difficulties traveling abroad? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for